many?
7.
Yeah. We very. 2 years ago, I had 18. But then last year we had like 9. Then this coming year we have 16. But yeah, so it varies.
Yeah. Bouncing around a little bit. Yeah. Okay, yeah,
I was hoping Priscilla would be here.
15 to 30 a year for large universities. Idaho.
Well, it's really upsetting because we've been cut faculty-wise, like substantially. The year after next, we're just going to be 2 lines. 2. And despite getting that many majors, I mean, there was just some politics, like religion being really protected, even though there's no majors. But is it fit mission, all that kind of stuff, and we're like, okay.
Interesting.
And we're more expensive, so that put us on the chopping block. So
We've had cuts too. I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah. So Priscilla and I, Mark's retiring, and Priscilla and I she'll be here and cobbling things, working with other departments to see if I can get electives, some electives from other units, like public policy from poli-sci, kind of making more of a applied major is what we're looking at doing. So it won't be as much theory stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think it's time to get going.
Yeah, I was going to see if Priscilla was here, but I don't think she's here yet. I think we can go ahead and start. Welcome. Thanks for coming. My name's Karen Travis. I'm the professor and chair of the economics department, and we're delighted to have an alum from 2000. Woo, Eric. Visiting us from University of Idaho, where he's an associate professor of economics. He got his PhD from the University of Colorado in Boulder. And his research focuses on immigration, knowledge spillovers, regional economic development, and wine markets, in case you're curious about that after his talk. In terms of teaching, he's focused most recently on macroeconomics, international and development economics. So we'd like to welcome Eric, and also once he's finished, we'll have time to open it up for questions. So welcome, Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, and thanks to all of you for coming today. It's a really great privilege to be back at the home campus, PLU, after all of these years. I have visited a few times, but not specifically the economics department. And so this summer, I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice after COVID to go visit PLU when things were waning, but they're not waning that much right now. So I'm glad we're all taking precautions with the virus. I want to talk about some of my current research today, which is on China's HighSpeed Rail system and the effects of that within China. But before I get to talking about the research, just want to talk about a little bit about how I got there as a professor, and to thank some of my economics professors who helped me while I was here: Karen Travis, Norris Peterson, Mark Ryman. I think he may be in the audience today. Way back there, thank you. I really enjoyed PLU, and I really enjoyed my econ major while I was here. And Norris was really influential in making me decide to become an economics major, or stay an economics major after I had declared it. And I remember his principles of microeconomics and labor economics classes and intermediate microeconomics, really digging into the foundations of economics. And it's not a very common subject for students to be passionate about, but he helped inspire that passion. And Mark, environmental economics and econometrics. I remember one thing that Mark said in the econometrics class was that econometrics, at least applied econometrics, is always a little bit of art and a little bit of science, and that's kind of stuck with me as I've done a lot of applied econometrics over the years, and nothing's ever perfect. It's always kind of messy, but you try to do the best that you can. Is the microphone working still? Okay, good. Yeah, and Karen, and so I had her health economics class my senior year here, and that was a really good class. And then afterwards, I was working at U.S. Bank the year after I graduated from PLU, and I applied to graduate school at the University of Washington. And I thought, I'm a great student, no problem. Didn't get in the PhD program. And that was the only school I applied to that year, so it was kind of a setback. But it was a kind of a good setback, like a reality check. Sometimes things are not as easy as you think they're going to be. And I went back to the drawing board, and I studied really hard for the GRE. And then I talked to Karen Travis, and she helped me put together some more applications. And I eventually got into the University of Colorado with a full ride teaching assistantship for 5 years, and it was a great opportunity. So, so thank you all, to all the professors at PLU. And so now let's talk about this paper that I'm working on. I started this about 2 years ago when I was on sabbatical. I got to go be a visiting scholar in Australia, where one of my good friends from graduate school, Nam Huang, is a professor at the University of New England Business School in Armidale, Australia. You've probably never heard of Armidale, but it's a nice little town about halfway between Sydney and Brisbane. And Nam's PhD student at the time, Zhenghan Yang, helped us with the project, and now he's a professor at Shandong University of Technology and Business. And I also got research assistance from Quinn Kinzer, who was an undergrad student of mine last year. So, evaluating the effects of transportation infrastructure projects. I like to do research on economic growth and development. There is another field of regional and urban economics that focuses on transportation economics, and there are lots of experts on transportation economics. I'm not really an expert on transportation economics, if anything, but these are interesting questions. Do public infrastructure projects enhance economic growth, or do they follow it? Right? Do they benefit some segments of the population at the expense of others? Right? Are there winners and losers when the government spends a lot of money up front on these things? And there's just this remarkable event to study here, and not many papers have studied it, which is between 1999 and 2016, China linked up 75% of its major cities with a modern, safe, efficient, high-speed rail system. The estimated cost between $250 and $370 billion, which is about 10% of 1 year of China's 2018 GDP, which is remarkable how low it costs, actually. In the US, the single high-speed rail line between San Francisco and Los Angeles was projected to cost $120 billion, and with the cost even rising above that. And that was just for one line between two cities. This is between something like 170 major Chinese cities for just $300 billion, right? Quite a deal. And by 2013, total passenger traffic on the network was 672 million, roughly double the amount traveling by air. Right? So it's really taken off, well, not taken off literally in China, but it's grown. This map shows, it's really small, but the colored routes are the major high-speed rail routes in the country. So a lot of them followed along where the conventional rail was located. And there's kind of a grid pattern so that major cities are all connected. This map shows approximate travel times from Beijing, and so most of the country can be reached within 8 hours on the high-speed rail, and it's very cheap compared to flights and that sort of thing, so very useful and accessible. So some study motivations. I'm always interested in learning more about factors that influence economic growth, of course. And China's economic success has sparked a revival of interest in industrial policy. Right? So should governments pick winners? Should governments use taxpayer money to invest in infrastructure and or private businesses, industries, that sort of thing? That's something that China is a lot more comfortable with than we are in the US. But even today, I think Congress is debating this $1 trillion infrastructure bill. So these types of spending projects, even if it's not a big high-speed rail system, are pretty relevant for the United States as well. Right? China's context adds other dimensions to analyzing the welfare effects of its central government projects. China's development is heavily weighted towards coastal provinces and major cities. And so one thing we want to think about is, does the high-speed rail system worsen these disparities or alleviate these disparities? And what are the kind of broad societal effects of this system? Other motivations include, has the high-speed rail system widened the wage gap between blue-collar jobs and white-collar jobs? And if so, why? Prior studies point to high-speed rail allowing greater specialization of cities into managerial and cognitive jobs versus assembly and routine jobs. And then another question is, how has the high-speed rail affected economic migrants? China has millions of internal migrants. The high-speed rail may improve welfare by reducing transport costs for migrants to go back and visit family. So for this reason, it's likely to spur even greater migration, allow for a lot of flexibility within China and reorganization of their economic activity. But yeah, the point in the second bullet is some of the prior literature really focuses on the reorganization of the economy within China because high-speed rail allows managers to take a day trip to a nearby city or nearby province to check up on the factory, or it allows people to commute from one city to another, neighboring cities. It's passenger-oriented by definition and not cargo-oriented like a lot of other transportation systems. Right. So the prior literature, within urban and regional economics, there are many studies of the effects of expanding transportation networks. Not many on the high-speed rail, however, which was built to carry passengers only, not cargo. Our paper follows directly on two other papers. Lin in 2017, who analyzed the effect of China's high-speed rail on employment by industry, and she created a measure of high-speed rail-induced market access, and found the effect of market access on employment. So looking to see if the employment in various industries within China expanded after the city got more access to high-speed rail. And she hypothesized that the high-speed rail allowed greater flexibility in job matching for high-skilled workers, raising their productivity, right, in ways that wouldn't benefit the low-skilled workers as much. Xu, in 2018, this is his doctoral dissertation, developed a model based on high-speed rail facilitating spatial reorganization of manufacturing firms, sorting managers and assembly workers into different locations. The model predicts rising demand and wages for assembly workers in cheaper second-tier cities and falling demand in first-tier cities. So that little paragraph, I've tried to summarize like a 60-page, very technical dissertation in one paragraph. There's a lot more to that paper than just that, but kind of what we're focusing on here is this hypothesis or prediction from his model that the high-speed rail is going to differentially affect some workers over other workers. Right? Some other papers that are relevant to this study, Banerjee, Duflo, and Qian in 2020 studied the effects of transportation infrastructure, mainly road and conventional rail, on China's growth. And they found an effect on per capita GDP levels across sectors, but no effect on per capita GDP growth. You may have seen Banerjee and Duflo's names recently. They won the Nobel Prize in Development Economics last year, or maybe 2 years ago now. But this paper with Nancy Qian of Kellogg University, I think, Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern University, is one of those papers that had kicked around for a long time and hadn't been accepted at a journal. Finally, it was accepted in 2020. So even Nobel Prize winners have some papers like that, right? Charnoz, Lalarge, and Trevian, 2018, studied the effect of high-speed rail expansion in France. Found that firms increasingly sorted job functions geographically, separating managers from manual workers. Right? So this was one of the papers that actually motivated Mingxi Xu to do this dissertation work on high-speed rail in China. It was this study in France that used micro-level data on French manufacturing firms and found reorganization using very detailed data because of the high-speed rail. Chandra and Thompson in 2000 examined the effect of expansion of the U.S. interstate highway system on economic activity and pioneered the inconsequential units approach, which addresses the issue of political determination of the expansion, biasing the analysis. And they limited their analysis to rural areas that just happened to become located near an interstate and compared with those that were not. Right? You know, because one of the problems with evaluating infrastructure investments or projects is that it's really non-random where those are built, how they're built. Right? So a place that may have better economic growth and be more connected politically may have an advantage in securing the interstate or securing the high-speed rail, that sort of thing. And that can throw your conclusions off. So Chandra and Thompson did this very clever approach, which was to only look at these rural counties in the United States that had interstates just happened to pass through them, but they didn't really have much of anything in the way of, a metropolitan area or city to begin with, and then experienced more economic growth after the interstate came through. So in our paper, we kind of used a similar approach, thinking that there are places within China that are also inconsequential, that happen to be on the way between big cities. And if we look specifically at those, we can get a really good picture of the effect of high-speed rail. So that Chandra and Thompson paper is important. So our research approach, we conduct an empirical analysis with data on 286 Chinese prefectures. And in the course of this research, I had to learn about what a Chinese prefecture is. It's geographically about the same size as a county in the United States, but much more like a metropolitan area because most of them have populations between 1 and 15 million people within prefecture. And we also looked at data between 2003 and 2016. that was the years of the data that we could find available when we started the project in 2019. We analyzed regressions of economic outcomes on the presence of high-speed rail. Economic outcomes including gross regional product per capita, which is kind of like GDP per capita, average incomes, the skill premium, so the gap in average wages between high-skilled and low-skilled industries within each prefecture, and average wage per industry, right? And then we employ the inconsequential units approach and do a separate analysis of a subsample that excludes capital cities and end-of-line destinations, which were selected by planners to receive the high-speed rail. Now, we don't have a lot of detailed information about the planning process for the high-speed rail. It would probably be good to dig up more on that, but you know, we can presume to some extent that the places in between the major cities and the ends of lines were less important than the others. So data sources, we go to the China City Economic Yearbook, which provides data on gross regional product, average wage by industry, population, public expenditure, right? And the China Railway Yearbook, which provides data on the service start dates for each high-speed rail line. And these are official Chinese government sources. Well, of course, there are some questions about the accuracy of reporting from the Chinese government. Interesting thing, though, is some scholars have correlated Chinese official data with other more independently verifiable data and shown correlation there and improvement in accuracy in recent decades. And so some of the leading articles in economic journals on the topic, like Lin and Xu that we're following from, make use of the official Chinese data. So we think it's trustworthy enough to do this analysis. All right, a little bit of detail about the data compilation. In a lot of my work, my research that I've done over the years, I've worked on building new data sets, building novel data sets. The great thing about that approach is instead of just taking a public data set off the shelf is nobody else can publish what you're publishing if you're the only one with the data, at least for a while. And this took a piece of work, which is why I started it on sabbatical. Yang digitized average wage per industry data, so half of which, over 2003 to 2016, half of which was only available on PDFs in Mandarin. So I definitely needed some help accessing that data, and thank him for his hard work in putting that together. But I also did hard work on what I could, which is coding variables from the data on the expansion of the high-speed rail system. So I created a dummy variable, like a 1-0 indicator for whether prefectures had at least one stop in operation for the year of the high-speed rail. Also a more quantitative continuous variable, stops, which counts the number of stops in operation in the prefecture. Thinking of like a city with 2 million people that only has one high-speed rail stop is not going to be as well served as a city of 2 million people with 4 high-speed rail stops, right? And once someone gets on the train in any location, they can connect to all the other trains in the system. And so for this, I used a map in English from travelchinaguide.com that Yang verified was comprehensive in listing stops in the high-speed rail system. There's only so many stops because if you have a fast train, it can't stop all the time. And this map lists a lot of stops, and Yang verified that all the stops in the Chinese online registration system match the stops on this map, right? And then using Google Maps, I made a determination of which prefecture each stop was in, right? So here's the full train system map. Right? Can't read the stop names on that, but you can see kind of where it goes. And I don't have a laser pointer here, but you can see kind of the hubs in different locations. The black cities are major capital cities. Here's a close-up of the Beijing area. So Beijing itself looks like it has like 5 different stops. Beijing West, Beijing, Beijing South. Maybe Beijing South is just one stop with 3 lines. And then down the blue line to the left, you have and sorry if I butcher Chinese pronunciation here, but Zhuzhou East and Gaobeidian East stops on the way to Baoding East. Right? So part of my task was figuring out which prefecture each of these stops belongs in. And down here you can see other major cities like Tianjin, Qingdao, Jinan. Right. So here's a Google Maps view of Baoding Prefecture, which is adjacent to Beijing. So a few years ago, Google introduced this new feature where you type in the name of any city, state, county. It'll show you the boundaries of that political unit. Now, sometimes political units or boundaries are disputed, and so Google has to walk a fine line in how it manages that. But the Baoding, you can see the red line there, and the sort of highlighted area is a city near Beijing that has 11 million people, so not particularly rural, although there are rural areas within the prefecture. And then matching up the stop names, so like Zhuzhou East is the first town on the way from Beijing to Baoding, and you can see clearly it's within Baoding Prefecture there. And Gaobeidian East is the next town. And in most of the cases, the stop names matched town names. Now, there were some tricky cases where they didn't, and you had to figure out, was it a shopping center that was named after, or a park, or a mountain, or something like that. And in some cases, we just had to kind of flip a coin, like which prefecture the stop is going to be counted in. Shandong Province is a small province about the size of Washington State in China, with a population of 90 million people, a little bit southeast of Beijing. This slide shows how the incidental indicator is defined, so how we define, which prefectures are incidental. So if you look here, there's a very thin green line running across from Prefecture 1 to Prefecture 2. Right? 1 is the capital of the province, Jinan, and 2 is the major port city in the province, Qingdao. And one of the early high-speed rail lines, from 2008, connected those two. And to keep it short, it went through 13 and 8, which is Zibo and Weifang. But down number 11, or number 10, Linji happens to be the most populous prefecture in the province, didn't get a high-speed rail line because it didn't happen to be between Qingdao and Jinan. Okay? So we can compare sort of the growth effects and wage effects of high-speed rail in these prefectures right above number 10, which is Linyi, and compare those kinds of ones and exclude Jinan and Qingdao, which are major growing cities, and get a sort of clearer picture of what's going on with the high-speed rail that way. Right. Kind of like having a treatment group and a control group in a study, but not randomly assigned, but sort of randomly assigned. Right? All right, some more details of our data set. So the China Economic Yearbooks report average wages in each city, which is a useful measure to look at if you're thinking about inequality and different changes in industry makeup. There's some issues with using the data, though. It's reported for 19 industries, and we construct a skill premium variable by averaging the average wages of high-skilled and low-skilled industries and taking the difference. We define the following as predominantly high-skilled, so information technology, finance, education, health, public sector. One justification for those is we can see in the data that those are some of the highest wage industries there. And then qualitatively, we know that people need a lot of education to work in those sectors, and generally there's a positive return to education, so high-skilled. Predominantly low-skilled, farming, hotel, business, residential, environmental services. So that would be like hotel cleaners and janitors and businesses, and environmental services like garbage collection and stuff like that is predominantly low-skilled. There were a lot, there's 19 industries. There's another 9 industries in between that we couldn't really classify as high-skilled or low-skilled. Manufacturing would be a great one to look at, but presumably employs both high-skilled and low-skilled workers, a lot of them, and we only have the average data, right, at the prefecture level, right? So it's quite aggregated. Right? Here are the summary statistics of the main variables. So table 1 from our paper. The real skill premium in yuan, adjusted for prices to 2010, was 20,130. So that's roughly about 6.5 or 7 yuan per dollar. So that's about $3,000 or $4,000 more on average in the high-skilled industries than the low-skilled industries. Average income, 37,000 yuan is worth 5,659 at current exchange rates. So still pretty low average income, not adjusted for purchasing power parity, but we also control for public expenditure, so generally other government spending in the prefecture. And then we have the high-speed rail indicator, our dummy variable, which in the full sample is 0.22, so 22% of the cities in our sample city year observations, sorry there, 22% had high-speed rail operation in our panel. Stops, on average, each prefecture had 0.6 of a stop during the time period. But I looked at the data more finely, and it's something like 90% of the observations didn't have any stops, and then some had up to 10 stops within the prefecture, 13, something like that. The incidental HSR indicator is lower, so 14% of the sample had the incidental high-speed rail, so they were both had high-speed rail, but they weren't the provincial capital cities or the end-of-line cities. So a summary of my results. We find slight negative effect of high-speed rail on gross regional product per capita after controlling for China's overall growth trend. So yeah, here's a interesting feature. If you just look at the raw correlation between high-speed rail and GDP per capita, there is a pretty substantial positive correlation. But of course, the high-speed rail was being rolled out in a time of strong economic growth around the country, and you want to control for the kind of co-trending behavior. And after you do that, then the provinces or prefectures linked to HSR actually had 3.3% lower GRP per capita. HSR is associated with higher skill premium, and especially in coastal provinces. which is where a lot of the population and economic activity is within China. It raised the scale premium in incidental coastal prefectures by 1,700 yuan per year, or about 9.3% over the mean scale premium. So pretty sizable effect there. And this increases with the number of stops per capita. Cities in more intensive high-speed rail access saw bigger increases in the premium. Right? And industry analysis, when we break it down by 19 industries, shows average wages increasing in some high-skilled industries, finance, healthcare, and entertainment, while decreasing in some low-skilled industries, hotel services, business services, due to HSR access. So not just the premium increasing, but the average wages were differentially affected for different industries. So implications of the results. We provide additional evidence that high-speed rail disproportionately benefited workers in high-skilled industries, raising income inequality in coastal provinces. And this extends the result of Lin by showing an additional effect of high-speed rail on the labor market, and confirms the prediction of Xu that high-speed rail leads to rising skill premium in coastal provinces. Now, rising inequality can undermine social harmony. We've seen rising inequality and social disharmony in the United States in the last 10 years, I would say. But in China, that's a big concern for the Chinese government. As you know, they've been increasingly taking steps in the past 10 years to combat rising inequality. And I provided this link. If you get my slides and you click on the link, there's an interesting discussion of rising inequality in China. High-speed rail also has positive effects on welfare by lowering transportation costs. And originally, this was one thing we wanted to study a lot, but it's really hard to get data on the prices of different transportation methods within China and compare how much people are saving from one transportation method to another. So that's unfortunate, but sometimes you have to go where the data leads you, and you don't always get to pick what you want to study. We're unable to estimate that effect directly. Right? And my last slide is just a list of the major references that I've mentioned today. So if you do get a copy of the slides and you want to read those papers in detail, they are there. Now, any questions from all of you about this topic or anything else? Thank you. In the back, yeah.
Hopefully they're kind of high-speed bus travel link. I don't know if it's going to be sounder, but it's in the system, your transit, from downtown Tacoma to Piscataway. I don't know if you've heard about it, or you're planning to expand your study so that it looks at all transportation systems, not just high-speed rail, but the other parts of it, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, how are other transportation methods affected, and that kind of thing? I did dig up some data on like the size of the road and conventional rail networks within China from another study. I haven't integrated that into this study yet. This is kind of focused just on high-speed rail, but that would be interesting to bring in too. Yeah. In the back? Yeah, that's a great question because there's been a lot of interest in high-speed rail in the United States, and it just never seems to be able to get going. Average wages are a lot lower in China, as we saw in the slides, like $5,000 on average. So the costs of construction are lower on the wages. Another cost factor is the land costs. In the US, a lot of the land where high-speed rail needs to go is privately held and needs to be compensated at market rates, right? All of the land in China is owned by the Chinese government, and they have dispossessed some farmers of land to make the high-speed rail, or set the compensation for other land, whatever they want to set. So the institutional system is different in China. It's just allowed them to build it more cheaply. They are also able to use technologies from German firms for the trains that I'm not sure if they paid the full R&D and licensing costs for that technology. Maybe there was some cheaper technology transfer that they made use of. Right? So lots of ways that. Mm-hmm.
So after all your research, did you come to the conclusion that personally that we should or should not try to integrate a high-speed railway system into our transportation in the US?
It's a good question. Strictly speaking, from our results, I think that it has the potential to raise inequality in some of our biggest cities. But that downside may be offset by upsides of the high-speed rail that we're not able to quantify in the research. Now, not being able to study the cost structure in the United States, I'm just speculating about this, but I don't think it would be economically efficient to connect most of our cities with high-speed rail. I just think about even just the environmental impact of running high-speed rail through a lot of rural areas like Montana and Colorado and stuff like that, and the wildlife corridors and stuff. But maybe major population corridors like the Northeast and California, it would make sense for. Right? Mm-hmm.
So your data set covers data from 2003 to 2016.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle of that is, is this better? Can you hear me?
I can hear you either way, but I don't know about the people in the back.
Well,
Yeah.
Sorry. In the middle of that data set from 2003 to 2016, you have the Great Recession. When you were analyzing your data, did you have to account for that in any way?
I didn't account for it in any way. I could look at that as an issue, and maybe after we send this to a journal, the editors or reviewers will say something about that. But one thing to think about is that the Great Recession did not impact China very much because their financial system was walled off from the rest of the world's financial system. So, it's a different context over there. Right. Yeah, over there in the back.
So when you were picking the industries for the high skilled and low skilled wages, you mentioned that there were several that didn't fit into either category. What kinds of responses or ideas would you say that this kind of middle category? And do you think it could be as well more profitable that part of the way that you selected was high skilled and low skilled wages that were already high?
Yeah, I'll sort of restate the question for everyone. So she's asking if what we're noticing in terms of the change in the skill premium is a function of which industries we picked to measure the skill premium. Is that kind of what you're asking? Yeah, so the way we've picked it is probably going to be the biggest skill premium that we notice between industries, and cherry picking industries that are going to generate that large skill premium. But what we're measuring is the effect, the change in the skill premium as from the change in high-speed rail access, right? So we should be able to notice that change no matter how we define the skill premium. And maybe we should do some robustness checks, some additional tests with different definitions of the skill premium, and there's a variety of things we can do in that respect that we will need to do. This hasn't been submitted to a journal yet, so yeah.
Can you explain, you're getting this
Mm-hmm.
We have such an increase in supply of workers that it seems, I'm not understanding the intuition about why the skill premium is increasing so much.
Yeah. So Shu's model is saying that the skill premium is increasing because the industries are specializing more and locating high-skilled jobs in the cities, the major cities, the first-tier cities, and locating low-skilled jobs in the second-tier cities. And Lynn's paper is saying something a little bit different, that the high-skilled workers are able to better interact and mix and find jobs when they have access. Does that answer your question, or am I missing something there? Yeah.
Well, I'm just surprised basically with the increase in inequality.
Uh-huh.
I can see a change in average.
Oh yeah, the population effect. I didn't mention that in these slides, but I have done an analysis of how population responded to the high-speed rail. And your hypothesis is that more people would move in if there's high-speed rail access, and then be able to, more easily visit family or travel within the country. I do find a little bit of a population effect. It's not that large, though. I'm trying to remember. It's maybe something like 2 or 3% increase after HSR. So that would affect wages, especially if more low-wage workers, low-skilled workers are moving in due to high-speed rail, and create more of that inequality, right? So, yeah, John?
Wondering whether the inconsequential cities, some of them are less inconsequential than others in terms of distance from major metropolitan areas.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of regional economic theory that says that distance has a big effect.
Yeah.
Small areas relative to large. Are these all treated the same?
Yeah, I treated them all the same, but that's a really good point, is that maybe I shouldn't treat them all the same. That places that are adjacent to a major metropolitan area more likely to get HSR. Like you saw on the map of Shandong, there's not a lot of leeway. All the prefectures are all stacked together like jigsaw puzzle pieces. And I don't have continuous measures of distance, but I could create a measure of like adjacentness.
They might grow more.
Yeah.
Grow less.
Mm-hmm.
One other little question. Isn't there a lot of, couldn't there be collinearity between HSR and stops? Because you can't have stops unless you have high-speed.
Yeah, they're very similar measures, so we don't include them in the same regressions at the same time. It's just kind of like the intensive margin versus the extensive margin of the effects of the high-speed rail here, right? Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the benefits of the high-speed rail outweigh the slightly negative effect on the gross regional product?
Yeah, I'm not worried about the slightly negative effect on the gross regional product. I think, unfortunately, our paper can't quantify the overall benefits of high-speed rail. And intuitively, I think that there are high benefits. And from conversations with both of my co-authors, who are from Vietnam and China, respectively, they think that it's really great for China, and Vietnam is trying to build its own high-speed rail lines. So anecdotally, it's really positive. I think, though, sometimes you got to get beyond like the intuition and the headline numbers and look at some of the issues a little more deeply, like we're doing in this paper with the inequality effect here. So, overall, I don't think high-speed rail is a bad thing for China. I think it's a great thing. Just want to point out one downside here. Right? Mm-hmm. In the back?
Given that you're from the Northwest, or your family's from the Northwest, are you at all curious about the HSR in this region and analyzing all of it?
You know, like, I grew up in Bellingham, and I went to PLU, and yeah, I love Washington State. I haven't been that interested in the effects here. It's just, there's not a lot to study yet in the sort of quantitative sense. I'm going big picture, like all of China here. But it is interesting. Actually, what I've been more interested in researching is the growth of the Washington wine industry in the last 30 years. I have several papers with my former colleague, John Miller here, well, current colleague emeritus, John Miller, on the Washington wine industry, which has revitalized some cities in eastern Washington, like Walla Walla and so on. Right? So.
I know you didn't look at this, but in terms, if you were trying to transport what you were looking at and then into additional benefits of climate change, because presumably all this high-speed rail is much better for climate change than either frequent air travel
Yeah.
or cars, some other. So, have you thought about doing any work in that direction? You need different colleagues, I assume.
Yeah, I need different co-authors. I mean, there are specialists in environmental economics, and I'm not one of them, but climate change is, yeah, hugely important here. I think China, you may, for economic and political reasons, favored, a transportation system that is lower carbon because it has to import a lot of its fossil fuels. But yeah, it's good for the whole world in that they have halved the number of air travelers within China because of the high-speed rail system. And if we built some high-speed rail systems between key cities in the U.S., like New York and Boston and Los Angeles, San Francisco, we would save a lot of those air trips as well. I haven't gotten around to quantifying it, though, so yeah. Yeah. That would be really interesting to look at, like, the ridership per line. I haven't been able to get that data yet. There is some data on the number of trains running on each line, trains per day. Actually, I have that data from 2003 to 2014, but not all the way to 2016. But there's some concern about the accuracy of that data. So in this analysis, I'm sticking to just number of stops and actually stops per capita and just overall HSR access. Right. Yeah?
Sorry, I have a question. While you were doing the research, did you look at the effects of rising population in China or rising skill levels in China?
So I don't control for skill levels. Just, so there could be other things going on at the same time. But I do control for the overall trend and prefecture average levels. So there would have to be something anomalous going on with like skill level in a particular city relative to the rest of China and relative to the rest of the cities to throw off the analysis in that respect. Yeah, so you can do a lot with panel data that you can't do with just more limited data set, just a time series or a cross section. But when you get those 13 cross sections stacked up, you can do a lot. So, all right. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. Yeah.